Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing 25.13 high-elo top lane tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. We are covering primarily the Master Plus bracket at the moment. I'll talk about some other champions in this tier list, which I think actually get even better the higher up you go, because Master Plus is still a relatively large bracket when it comes to like high elo play, and like the gap between like low master, mid master, high master, all the way up until challenger can define where a champion is placed quite a bit. So let's get into it. The C tier is going to lead off with Maokai. Maokai is just a pick I would basically never recommend in top lane at the moment. The champion's just lost too much of its item strength to kind of warrant playing it. It doesn't have good matchups within the top lane. And you just don't have the agency which you want from a champion, which is just going to already put you at a deficit. The one compelling reason of playing Maokai is that he's very easy to play, but it's not enough. Like, he is just a bad champion, and I don't recommend him at the moment. Alawi's not even that great for mid and low elo at the moment, where as a champion she traditionally does do quite a bit better. It wouldn't surprise me if down the line we end up buffing her or changing her kit slightly. Right now she just isn't supported almost at all, and for high elo she's just not a good option. She's not popular at all, so yes, remains as a C tier option. Tom Kench sits within the C tier. He's just been over-nerfed. The simplicity of it is that the champion was it was beginning to pick up a lot of ban rate within mid to low MMR brackets. That was when Heartsteel was stronger, his AP ratios were better, which actually helped him quite a bit in high elo for a time, where like you could opt into like the Riftmaker Protobal, Rabadon kind of core, where you're actually more of like a Mordekaiser profile champion, and it gave you quite a bit of dueling potential, splitting potential, just a lot more damage, a lot more kind of agency in the game. It's not as good anymore. They went after some of his AP ratios, and he's just a pick I wouldn't really recommend playing in almost any situation, unless you're very comfortable on him and there's like certain flex / compositional dependencies which you can kind of get away with. Garen has been over-nerfed. The champion just doesn't have enough damage within his kit. I've spoken to a Garen OTP and they just don't think the champion's in a good state at the moment. The pick has definitely fallen with the set of nerfs it received, primarily trying to adjust them back towards like opting into like AD boozer items, but things like Shojin, even the Yomus and like the Starks just don't do quite as well, or don't have as much like potency, but the like crit variation instead, like the PD, IE variation. And yeah, he's just lost a lot of his high elo power because of it. The other two picks here are Nasus and Udyr. Udyr's been in a pretty bad spot for top lane for a while. Both the AD and the AP builds just don't perform that well. The AP build was primarily what you used to see. That was when his like his kit was just generally stronger, the itemization was stronger, Leandri's has been nerfed, Thimble's been nerfed, Unending's been nerfed, and it's overall just not that great at the moment, so he does remain as a C tier option. He's a high C tier option though. I think if you're an OTP, you can kind of get away with playing this champion in certain spots just by knowing his lethal thresholds, especially if you're opting into like AD, like the Ravenous Trinity Udyr, for example. Nasus just isn't that great at the moment. He's fine for mid to low MMR brackets, but he needs to be like strong to be viable within high elo. Right now, his Emax build just doesn't really exist, and that was like some of the ways of getting around some of his harder matchups. You can use him as a counter pick, and I still think he can be fine in certain spots, but overall, he's just not that strong of a champion at the moment, and for that, he also does remain as a C tier option. Moving on to the B tier, then we lead off with Volibear, who has spots where he can be fine. Like, I think if you're very comfortable with a champion, you know his lethals, you know your dive potential, then this pick can be very volatile, especially against certain champions, which just don't really have the tools to kind of like work around it. I don't recommend Volibear over like Warwick, for example. I think if you play Volibear, then a lot of times you see like traditionally these like beat down champions where you just like are forced to kind of trade and then like use that to kind of snowball your advantages are similar and like have like levels of pools with each other. I think you should just play Warwick at the moment. I think Warwick is a lot better of a top lane option, has just a kind of is just stronger across the board. Volibear, I don't think is horrible though. I think if you're comfortable on him, you can make him work. I just don't think he's that high up in the top lane tier list at the moment. If anything, yeah, like sits as more like a mid to low end B tier option. The heat is already getting to me. I live in the United Kingdom. It is so hot. I'm struggling. Satrani sits within the B tier. This pick has, I think, spots where it can work. I think if you use it as a flex option and you opt into like kind of game states where you can make use of your E, then I think this champion really like raises in priority. That being said, though, it's not a prio pick by any means, and I think you have to have already kind of played Sejuani in the past to make this champion work. And I just recommend other tank options over her. But if you want to play her in like situations where you think she can be really good, I think they do exist, and yeah, she can be opted into. Tryndamere is fine. I think he's an okay option. Like, I think a lot of the B tier champions, if you're just very comfortable on them, can still be like OTPable and like function in the right spots. I think he's just a below the bar champion. I don't really recommend him, but if you're very comfortable with the play style and just kind of the split push like situation which you want to kind of opt into with this champion, then yeah, I think he can be decent. Right now though, we're in a team fighting meta, and yeah, Tryndamere is just not going to be as good at team fighting than like most of the top lane pool. Zed sits within the beta. It's mostly played just by OTPs. I think if you're very comfortable on him, pilot him really well, he's a good pick in like 3 different roles. If you're not comfortable on him, you're not going to play him. Like, he is just an OTP champion. Trundle sits within the beta. I played against Kaguru recently. Obviously, I'm pretty sure he's like number 1 Trundle player on EU West at the moment. I think the champion's fine. I don't think he's amazing in the top lane. He's definitely a lot better in mid to low MMR brackets because the play pattern, once again, is very, very like linear. It's all about split push, and we're not that. I mean, like, split pushing just isn't that strong at the moment, which is why champions like Tryndamere, Nasus, Trundle just don't perform that well in the top lane at the moment. Silas, I think, as a counter pick can be really good. I think if you don't use him as a counter pick or you don't play him, then you just ignore him. He doesn't really like come into the top lane as a factor. But if you already do play him, you're comfortable on him, you can opt into him in maybe like your Malphite and your Nara situations because you can get a huge amount of value out of their ultimates. But I think those are spots where, yeah, Silas can work. Wukong, an OTP champion. I think if you play a lot of Wukong, you can be really comfortable on him. Play him in like those AD matchups where you can get a lot of value out of your passive. He's just an OTP counter pick reliant champion. That's why he's a B tier option. I don't think he's like one of the top OTP options, which is why he doesn't sit in the OTP tier. I probably should have gone over the tier system to begin with, but yeah, like S tier, pretty self-explanatory. SC is S tier counter pick, where I think they become S tier champions in counter pick scenarios, but are more like A, maybe even B tier champions if you don't use them as a counter pick. OTP left to right is like the champions which I think can jump 2 tiers either way, depending on how much like time you've put into them. Like, if you're not very comfortable on them, then yeah, they definitely do struggle, but they can be the best champion in the game if you like put the time into them. Things like Aurelia and like a Rail King example is what I used when I was like describing the tiers. I think Aurelia is a great example of an OTP where if you've got a lot of time in Aurelia, this champion can look incredibly oppressive and very dominant. If you're not, then it does just look a bit mediocre compared to some of the other options. Vayne, Varus are decent counter pick range top laners. I think if you've got the time in them, they can be decent options. Vayne traditionally is a lot more OTP'd, and yeah, I think if you find the right spots for her, or if you just utilize your like knowledge of the champion, she can definitely like win a lot of games, but is also gonna part team composition, struggle in a lot of matchups, and that can definitely be a vulnerability of the champion. Malphite, I just don't like that much at the moment. Even as a counter pick champion, I just don't think he has the agency to really want to bring out. Like, he is the auto-filled counter pick champion at the moment. Like, if you do not play top lane and you need something to answer AD matchups, then Malphite is probably your option. Otherwise, you're probably just playing a champion with more agency, more carry potential, and utilizing that as your counter pick. I think when Malphite's strong though, he can be a very good option. Right now though, I think he's just fine, so he does sit within my B tier. Teemo sits within the B tier. Played against Ramiora yesterday. I believe Ramiora is number 1 Teemo on EUS. And yeah, I mean, I think the champion's fine. I think he's decent. I think the right matchups, you can definitely forge yourself good advantages. I don't think he's like one of the best top laners though. Like, I think you do have to an extent be very comfortable on the champion to really push for like the harassing and laning phase, making sure you're utilizing the passive and the shrooms effectively, and then kind of like getting your value in team fights later on into the game with those shrooms to kind of get value out of the champion. Mordekaiser and Yorick at the top of the B tier. I have them at the top of the B tier because I think they can compete with some of the A tier options. Like, Mordekaiser received the recent buff to his Q, which was really big for high elo. Like, it helps his wave clear breakpoints. It helps his trading. It's like early game power, which is meaningful. Obviously, Mordekaiser is not that traditionally good as a high elo option. Even when they did the ult change, he's more of just a counter pick reliant champion, which is why I don't rate him that highly. But I think if you're very comfortable on Mordekaiser, he can like work in certain spots. Like, I think you can can work with him here. I just wouldn't OTP him in high elo. Like Master Plus OTP Mordekai's just aren't that common compared to some of the other options. And Yorick received another nerf this patch, which has definitely hurt him more in higher MMR brackets than it does in low MMR brackets. I think Yorick's going to start going back towards being this like low elo skew champion. Overall, the kit reshape, I don't know whether it was a success. I know a lot of Yorick players which just aren't happy with the kind of where he is at the moment, being like a Trinity 4 spot almost. That being said though, yeah, I think in the right matchups you can still definitely get value out of this champion. I mean, the obvious one which I always take is the Argot example, where Argot takes like 4 autos through his W to kill a ghoul, which is very, very miserable, and it can be very polarizing in just like how the matchup dynamic goes. So there are matchups where Yorick can definitely still work, but if you blind Yorick, get answered by like an Aurelia OTP, you will just struggle throughout the entire game because that matchup is still very, very Aurelia favored. Moving on to the A tier then, I lead off with Yone, who actually, now I've spoken with some Yone mains, I'll probably put him at the high end of the B tier. He's not that good at the moment. The champion definitely struggles compared to where he has been in the past. VW nerf, not too long ago, did really hurt him as a top lane option. For that, yeah, he sits in the B tier at the moment. I still think he'll feel very good on him though. He definitely has some very, very like clear skill expression, but is definitely not that great at the moment, so gonna sit within the B tier at the moment. Cassiopeia, I think if you're very comfortable, you utilize her as like a counter pick into some of like a compositional counter pick. I think you can get a lot of value out of this pick, and I think she's deserving of an A tier spot at the moment. Zac, I think, is slightly underrated. He's obviously not that popular, and even when he was really strong, he wasn't that popular. But I think if you can pick him in like as like a counter pick to like a tank, you know that you can get good value out of a champion. Maybe you're playing into a lot of the mobile carries. I think he can be a very solid A tier option. He's not a high A tier option, but like definitely more like a mid to low like kind of option there for you. Aurora sits within the A tier. I think if you're very comfortable in Aurora, this champion can still be a really, really good top lane option. I don't think she's the premier AP like ranged pick at the moment. I believe that's what kind of goes to Kennen in the current top lane pool. But I think Aurora, like number 2, 3, like around that kind of area. Maybe not like just like AP generic options, but like as like one of those like ranged harass kind of like big team fighting ult picks you can opt into. Ryze is another pick alongside her. I think if you're very comfortable with Ryze, you execute his combos correctly, he may be a very good counter pick. I believe the common one is Ryze into Kennen, if I remember correctly, where you can opt into that matchup if you're very, very comfortable on the Ryze. Quinn sits within the A tier. I've underplayed, but I think she can be really strong if you've put the time into her. She might actually be one of the OTP like champions. I don't quite have her there. I think she does sit as more like a generic A tier option, but does definitely scale the more time you've put into her, because she does rely quite heavily on the fact that she is unpopular, and people don't understand how to kind of play her against the play pattern of her ultimate. Kali, I think, is in a really good spot, and same with Pantheon. I think both these champions are like underappreciated top lane options at the moment. I think if you can pick them and you're very comfortable on them, like in the right spots, then yeah, I think they can definitely take over games, and they give you a lot of agency. Pantheon with his global coverage, and obviously he's going to be contested with his like jungle presence at the moment, but Akali has really, really good solo execute thresholds, which can be really valuable when you're looking for like a counter pick into like your Olafs and your Gwens, for example. Cho'Gath sits within the A tier at the moment. I think as a tank option, he's definitely one of the better scaling picks. And honestly, you could have things like the Ornn and the Sion as like relatively kind of like contestable tank options. I think Ornn is also a really good scaling kind of counter pick tank, where if you find the right spots for him and to like a mobile comps as well with the ultimate, he can be really powerful. I think Sion's the best blind option of the 3 tanks here. Cassante is probably the most skill expressive of the tank options here. Like I think all of them have different like strengths going for them. Definitely has like a lot of outplay potential, but Cho'Gath is like the definitive like scaling option almost. His ultimate's an incredibly powerful objective securing ability, and in this team fight like meta where we're like playing for Drakes quite a bit, I think Cho'Gath really shines as an option in that field. Argot sits within the A tier. I think he has, always the problem with Argot is he just has a lot of losing lanes. Like Argot really struggles in lanes up until he gets toggle, and that's where like you're really looking for what kind of matchups you can really take over in, and then like playing around your 13 with your Kaliva stacks. I think those are really, really strong points of the of Argot, and playing into things like Jax, for example, can be like quite rewarding if you're like really understanding of how like the counter strike into Argot E matchup kind of goes. What other picks we got on the A tier? So I have Gnar, who I'm not. Gnar is higher than maybe I would have placed Gnar, but I know a Gnar main who thinks Gnar's still quite a decent champion. I primarily just play Gnar as like a counter pick option. Like I actually play a decent chunk of Gnar, and yeah, I utilize him as like maybe like a Cassante counter pick, and there are other options which I think this pick can work into. But I think he suffered from grass being nerfed. Fleet is fine option on him now. Like a lot of people have kind of opted back into going Fleet, but I think there is room for him. I still think he's a good and definitely elite skewed option, but not. I don't know. I think he's more like a mid A tier option than maybe like a high A tier option at the moment. Set I have within the A tier at the moment. Set's definitely in one of the best spots he's been in, especially for elite at the moment. His itemization is just very good. I think people have caught on to the fact that Set is very strong, and he's definitely started seeing play again, especially with like Overlord's Bloodmail being in a very strong spot on him at the moment. So definitely something to be aware of. And then Warwick, I've actually spoken to someone who was like talking about Warwick quite a bit, and like they think regard Warwick as being a very good top laner, and I think Warwick can be a really good top laner. I think you've got to put a lot of time into him, though. I think knowing his lethal ranges is very, very important, and just how much you can push with barrier when you're on this champion. I also think he can be a bit counterpick dependent, like in certain matchups, like once again, take the Urgot example. Urgot really easily plays into Warwick. It's a very, very good matchup for the Urgot. It's why I recommend like Urgot as a counterpick to Warwick if you ever see that champion blinded. But yeah, I think he's a deserving high A tier champion. Like, if you're very comfortable on him, he can be a very rewarding pick to opt into. Moving on then, we also have Gragas, who I also have in the high A tier. I think if you're very comfortable on Gragas, he can be a very good champion. He could probably also find himself a spot within the OTP tier, especially because I think OTP Gragas, like when they really show what they can do with the champion, he can look very, very oppressive like throughout all stages of the game for the most part. If you know what I come to on him though, I think he does remain as like a pretty solid counter pick, like A tier option, but it can be rewarding if you put a lot of time into him. So the OTP champions, I've kind of listed this as left to right, albeit I think a lot of them can be really, really, like, even some of the best champions within the game, and then some of them maybe shift a bit lower down, especially if you just haven't put the time into them. So I like towards the lower end of the OTP tier, I have things like Rengar, for example. I think Rengar, very, very dependent, like, you have to be an OTP of this champion, otherwise you just won't see it, like, no one plays outside of OTPs, and it's just about knowing how to use the bushes and execute the combo, like pressing the buttons in the right order to make sure you're maximizing your damage. If you can't do that, then you don't play this champion. If you can, then you're probably an OTP and you're probably going to continue playing this champion. I think Rengar top is fine. I think he's decent, even if you like have the time into him. If you don't, then yeah, you're not playing the champion. I just don't recommend him whatsoever. Heimerdinger, I also think sits within the OTP tier. I think this champion, if you understand how to use the turrets to kind of like really aggressively siege early on, just like understanding the kind of the need for AP on this champion, because he's a very, very aggressive item scaler at the moment. Like they've pushed a lot of power into his AP ratios, which is why you'll even see like Rabadon Rush Heimerdingers in certain situations. I think if you're very comfortable on him, you understand like the turret placements and how you want to go about like really just pressuring enemy top laner. I think that's where this champion really dominates as a pick. Kled is obviously being changed next patch quite aggressively. They're trying to push him more towards bruiser builds, away from the lethality builds. That being said though, I think Kled is a very, very dependent like level 3 through 5, and then like you could say like 6 through 9 kind of champion, where you need to know your lethal thresholds. If you don't get like solo kills early on into this game, early on into the game, then you will just be weaker than other options, and that is why he's a very, very dependent, like knowing your kind of like damage thresholds to kind of make the pick work. Camille, it's just not that great at the moment. I still think she is an incredibly OTP dependent champion, not as much as like the other three here. You do just need to understand kind of the kit of the pick and why you are playing it within the game. If you don't like, if you're playing her just like generalistically, then I think the champion becomes so much weaker because of what her identity as a champion is. Like this split pushing, isolated target champion where you need to execute your combos correctly. You need to be able to pressure the most out of like with this champion. I still think the best example, I believe it was Bin against was it? Yeah, it was Bin against T1, I believe, where it was like game 5, maybe last year MSI, where he got the where he executed a Camille combo over the wall onto Faker Azir. I still think that is like the pinnacle of like what this champion's about, and just like making sure you're getting like the maximum value out of this champion is like very, very crucial. Singe sits within the OTP tier. I mean, this one's pretty self-explanatory. You don't see this champion outside of OTPs, but OTPs make it look incredibly oppressive to play against, and they'll always find a way to proxy. No matter how hard you try and stop them, they'll randomly just like go for like a free. I don't know. Singe is a weird champion, and I hate playing against him. But there's no doubt in my mind that he is incredibly OTP dependent. Like, I can't imagine anyone just picking up Singed and like expecting to perform well if you haven't already put the time into him. That's just the kind of pick he is. I think Gangplank, you've got to be very Chinese to play Gangplank. If you're not, then and you're Western, then I think you'll really struggle. Unless you're solo backer, obviously. That's the exception in the matter. Or we got a couple. We got like that was the other one. I mean, no way for you plays Gangplank, but he's a mid laner. He also doesn't really play him that much anymore. Anyway, I digress. Gangplank, I think, is an incredibly hard champion to play. Obviously, no one's going to dispute that. I mean, obviously, he had seen some, like, a stint of competitive. I believe Keen played Gangplank, and it looked pretty bad. But he got buffed this patch, and it was kind of a compensation for the Grasp nerf. So that did affect him. There are people which opt into different things. Like, I've seen Solo Backer run Arcane Comet. I see Fleet get used quite a bit at the moment. Grasp is still being ran in certain situations. And I just think if you're very, very comfortable understanding, like how to utilize the barrels, the kind of, like, the combos of this champion, then I think he can be really good. I think if you don't, then yeah, he definitely suffers from like the OTP syndrome where he will just become a lot weaker of a champion. Aurelia, I mean, I spoke about this one. It's the Aurel King example. If this champion can look like one of the best picks in the game, if you've just sunk a huge amount of time into her, she can look really bad for like your first 50 games if you just haven't. It's why I just recommend her as an OTP. I think she's in a good spot though, the buffs this patch, and I believe she's probably going to be one of the champions on my thumbnail alongside Gangplank. So I think that yeah, she's just a very dominant laning kind of champion where once you're like going through lane, getting a balk, and then getting like your whole breaker traditionally is where this champion really shines as an option. Nidalee, okay, so purple border. I mean, I'll talk about the two non-purple borders which I have within the OTP tier, and then I'll talk about the other three which I do. So Riven and Fiora are probably the definitive two like OTP champions at the moment. I think both these picks, if you understand like your thresholds, you understand the combos, you understand like how you want to go out playing these champions, they are two of the best picks in the game. I think Riven, incredibly strong champion, has been for a long time, is always very present within high-low among OTPs. Fiora, I still think is an incredible option. There are like different route, like keystone setups and just like different ways of playing this champion, but at the end of the day, if you just you do just have to nail these champions down as like putting hundreds, thousands of games into them. Otherwise, they will just not be as good as other options in the top lane pool. Like, you do need to put so much time into these champions. Purple Water. So, Nidalee, Rumble, Jace. I think these champions are, like, in Master, probably drop. Like, maybe, like, A, B tier. But GM Plus, they are just some of the best performance champions. There's a reason why I believe most top laners, especially in Korea, it's, like, almost every top laner in, like, Challenger and GM, has Jace as a champion within their pool. He is incredibly good. He is one of, if not the best lane bully within the game. Nidalee is there with, like, an asterisk. I think Nidalee, if piloted incredibly well, is also an incredibly good lane bully, but does fall off so much more aggressively than Jace, for example. Rumble did get nerfed, and you could argue Rumble probably should be, like, here. I think Jace is the definitive. I think Rumble probably drops a bit. There are, like, matchups which can stonewall Rumble, and Jace for that matter, like your Science, your Orns, for example. Traditionally, what you see in competitive is, like, answers which will come out. But I think in the if you've put the time into them and you're like GM Plus, then these are going to be some of the mandatory champions within your pool. S-tier counter pick. So some of these are like are interesting ones. So I'll go through them. So Galio, obviously, specifically an answer to Rumble. You don't really see him outside of that. There have been like ways of playing him. I mean, into some of those like AP matchups, but I don't really recommend him outside of the Rumble matchup. But you have to play him as like an answer to Rumble if you are playing at the high, like a high level of play. There's a reason why most people still in competitive play Galio as an answer to Rumble. It is so good. Like, it is just so good as an option, and it's kind of like the reason why Galio top even exists at the moment. Yasuo, his wind wall is one of the main tools as the reason you use him as a counter pick. I think his laning phase can be incredibly oppressive against certain matchups, and yeah, the wind wall value is very high. You do need knockups within your team. If you don't, then you do limit yourself in terms of what you can play off of. But if you play him as a counter pick, I think this champion is an incredibly good spot at the moment. Darius, I mean, Raider has very clearly shown why this champion champion is an incredibly good counter pick. You play him into like some of your tank matchups in the top lane, or even some of the more vulnerable, less mobile like squishies. You can just take over the game. This champion can be so oppressive in the right spots, and I think he's very deserving of an S tier counter spot at the moment. Poppy, this one is like very clearly a three-way flex pick, which can be incredibly powerful if you can utilize the W and the tools she provides as a champion. She can also be very oppressive in laning phases if you understand your like how your kit functions, and you can even opt into things like Doran's Blade early if you are just looking to really brute force your way through the early lane. I can't remember who the OTP who is primarily just almost does like Doran's Blade as like default. There is like a Poppy player on EU West, but yeah, the champion I think is a counter pick. Definitely push more towards scaling with like a lot of the nerfs she's kind of received over time to try and like push out support, but yeah, can still be a very, very good option. The other picks here are Kale. I think Kale into some of the tank matchups, and if you pilot her really well, is an incredible option. Olaf, I spoke about this one a bit because there are some people which think this champion can just outright be like an S tier option, and some which like I don't really think this is as definitively as like a counter pick, but I think this is probably the tier which suits him best, because I think you can argue that maybe like here, like Warwick for example, he can kind of fit most of the tiers towards the high end. Olaf is an incredible option though. I really do value him incredibly highly as a counter pick. You play him into a mobile compositions which don't have the tools to kind of like work around his ultimate, and he's playing alongside maybe an enchanter, then this pick can just 1v9 games consistently. Vladimir, Shen, and Mundo wrap up the S tier counter pick options. In the case of Vladimir, I think he's a bit more unique, where maybe he's not as counterpick dependent as some of the other options here, but maybe can fit a bit more into the OTP tier. But I think as a counterpick, he can also 1v9 games, which is why I really do value him as like an option here. Shen, I think as an S tier counterpick into matchups which just don't really have the tools to punish him, and his ultimate, his early game power can really like shine through as an option. Very clearly can make him a great option. I mean, Shending Help, for example, really shows like how the champion shines. I think Mundo as a counter pick is also incredibly powerful against those low damage, non-percentage damage compositions, which which maybe have marksmen which just don't have the tools to get through him. He can just run and like one-shot backline. That is like the type of juggernaut he is. Opting into things like the Titanic Hydra, the Overlord's Bloodmail as like a 4th slot item can be very, very oppressive for certain compositions to deal with. My S tier then. So I am going to lead off with Kennen. This is probably the most debatable one, because I think the other 5 are kind of seen as like to an extent like the mandatory top 5. Yeah, I mean that's kind of just where they are. So Kennen is an incredibly powerful early game bully with great scaling, great just great matchup pool at the moment. Like things like Jax, for example, really struggle into Kennen, and Jax is obviously very popular in his current state. I think he has like the ability to kind of flex his itemization a bit, whether you want to opt into a bit more scaling, opt into a bit more early game bullying, your rocket belts, your Leandrews, for example. Just has a lot of tools going for him at the moment. I think he's a very, very potent elite skewed pick. Gwen, still present as a great option. She's still seen primarily as a counter pick and competitive, but is blinded in... She's blinded sometimes in competitive, but primarily as a counterpick to like Sion, for example. I think that's where she shines as a champion. She's definitely lost a lot of her popularity in the high elo kind of community. She's like, I believe, number 10 or 11 at the moment, and she is declining. That being said, though, I still think the pick's incredibly good, and I think if you play in the right spots and you understand how to like edge with her W correctly, she can really dominate a lot of matchups, which she maybe just shouldn't be allowed to. It can be quite polarizing in the right spots. Renekton and Aatrox I have within the S tier. I think Renekton is your jack of all trades, point and click CC bruiser within the top lane. I think he just has a lot of tools and a lot of value within his kit. His ultimate's an incredibly powerful ability. He's pretty good across the game. Like the old Renekton didn't scale very well. Current Renekton scales pretty decently. You can still be a great team fighting champion later on into the game and still look to just outright one-shot backline if you are given the opportunity. The case of Aatrox, this one's a bit more subjective. I think the champion's actually just overpowered at the moment. I think you can even blind him in the right spots if you ban out maybe like your Fioras, for example. You do have to pilot him really well though if you are blinding him. Otherwise you can just use him as a counter pick to like your Sans, your Mundos, for example. Champions which like basically just enable you to kind of like freely hit within fights and kind of like sustain through a lot of damage. Your number 1, 2 though I think are very clear. I think Jax and Ambessa are very easily like the picks here. Jax with his recent buffs is really like just shines as an option in his current state, being able to opt into his grasp and lethal tempo in the in what matchups you kind of want to opt into. He has mostly good matchups for the most part as well. Like there are most champions either struggle to punish him or have to be very, very good at piloting their picks to punish him. Traditionally, what you see is Jax mains will ban out Jace, and then usually play around what other options are like he has to opt into, albeit things like Kennen maybe in Master or like better ban options. And then Ambessa looks to be the definitive number one. I think when playing Ambessa, you traditionally see like Warwick or what's the other one? Renekton bans. Camille isn't as present at the moment, which is why you traditionally don't see that one get banned as much, but it has been used as a part in the past as a counter pick to the Ambessa. That being said though, there's a reason why like 11 out of 15 or something, I checked like a couple of days ago, like top laners have Ambessa within their pool. It's just how strong she is as a champion. Even within like the group which I'm in, like of like high elo players, almost all of us have Ambessa as a champion. It's like 9 out of 10 players have Ambessa as a champion within their pool because of just how good the champion is. And the main like even outside of lane, like the value you can get out of this pick into like a mobile carries, like a mobile mage in the mid lane or a mobile AD carry, it's just so high, and it just gives her so much value as a champion at the moment, which is why she is still very, very present and competitive as a pick. Surprised she hasn't been nerfed, but there's a clear reason why she is number one at the moment. I mean, Ambessa Jax, yeah, easily, like, recommendable as number one. But, like, my OTPs are always going to be, like, your, for recommendation for, like, your Fioras, your Rivens, your Relias. Your GM, like, plus champions are, like, your Jaces, your Rumbles, your Nidalees. There's loads of good S-tier counter picks at the moment, which I think if you play them are really, really powerful. And then I think the definitive S-tier just gives a lot of variety of what you want to opt into at the moment. I think, yeah, there's just a lot of things you can, like, kind of do in the current top lane meta. And there's a reason why a lot of these things are subjective. I don't think any of these are, like you could argue against a lot of these, but purely based on like player kind of opinions or like what you've experienced. So those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.